If you had to take a country like America and take its politics and confine it to just one state that you think is the best representation of this country, the best representation of the trends over the last few decades, the best representation of how elections are won in the modern day, which state would you choose? Well, some of you might say California or Texas. Those are the biggest states. They have diverse areas like Austin, college educated liberals, Montgomery, more conservative suburbanites as opposed to places like Harris County, which have more liberal suburbanites. You have a lot of Hispanics in the Rio Grande Valley. You even have some Indians and Asians. Places like Fort Bend County. You have the big cities. You have the big exurbs. You have the rural areas. You could say even if you're not going to choose a big state like that, you could choose a state like North Carolina. North Carolina has a large college educated population in the research triangle of Orange, Durham, Wake County. It also has some pretty Republican suburban areas between Greensboro and Charlotte. There's some Republican rural areas across the state. It has some black areas. Which give representation, at least in how the map is shaded, to the nearly 12% of Americans who are African American. It has some suburban areas that have trended left over recent years. New Hanover County used to be consistently Republican. Same thing with Watauga County. Even the margins in places like Guilford, Forsyth, and Wake used to be much narrower than they are now. And even though all three of those counties shifted towards Trump in 2024, Trump was far away from matching Romney's 2012 performance. And at the same time, you have some Republican trending areas like Robeson County and Obama County that voted for Mark Robinson this cycle and voted for Donald Trump by 28%. You even have areas like Pasquotank County, which flipped in recent years, or actually not recent years. It flipped in 2022 and 2024, signifying that Republicans may have made the improvements among African Americans that have been rumored for so long. And at the same time as all of that, you have hefty Republican rural areas, which, while they used to vote for Romney, have voted for Trump in much larger fashions. This is a relatively good explanation of all the swings that have happened over American politics. But my personal pick, if I had to boil down all of American politics to just one state, wouldn't even be a massive key swing state like Pennsylvania or Georgia, the ones with massive electoral vote prizes and the ones that line up pretty accurately with the tipping points and the popular votes. I would actually pick Wisconsin. Now, Wisconsin used to be the quintessential battleground state, at least for a few years. In 2016, it was the tipping point state, and in 2020, as stupid as it looks, if Georgia, Arizona, and Wisconsin had gone to Trump, the three narrowest states, Trump would have gotten 269 electoral votes to Joe Biden's 269 electoral votes. And based on the control of House delegations in the House of Representatives, that's excluding the fact that more than likely Republicans would have taken back the House had Trump improved by the point necessary to flip these three states. But if you exclude that, the House delegations would have elected him. Whether the Senate elects him is a different story. I would put my money on yes, because I would bet that John Ossoff loses in the initial round to David Perdue. But that's irrelevant to the point. Wisconsin was the tipping point state in 2016 and 2020. So going into 2024, you would expect that it's tipping point state again. In fact, when I thought that Trump was going to win a somewhat modest win, I actually thought it wouldn't be the tipping point state because it would shift to the right of the national environment. And um, I, what the fuck happened? This was such a shock on election night to me personally. You know, I had heard the discourse to like, oh yes, Wisconsin. The polling shows Kamala Harris up. Therefore, it's gonna vote like D+5. But we had gone through these in previous cycles, and though it was a little bit weird how Wisconsin polling was actually more favorable to Kamala Harris than Michigan polling, when the two usually have a similar polling bias. I chalk that up to Michigan polling is just especially bad this year. Um, Since Wisconsin has consistently voted to the right of Michigan, I think ever since 1992, maybe even 1988, more than likely that trend won't reverse itself. And yet it did. And I think that's part of the reason why it is the quintessential American state, because it's not exactly a battleground state. It, it's a battleground state in that it will swing from election to election, but not that it will be integral for a majority of the electoral votes. Even a state like Nevada, which swings and is smaller than Wisconsin, still is pretty integral. That was Bush's margin in 2000. Had he lost Nevada to Al Gore would have won the presidency. But two, Nevada does seem to have trended pretty Republican, and unless Democrats can seriously repair their Hispanic appeal, more than likely will drift off the battleground map eventually. And with that, Arizona, Nevada, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania will be Republicans' path to an electoral college majority. Wisconsin is situated in the weird, uncanny valley between it's a potential win for Republicans, but it's never or almost never going to be integral for a majority of the electoral votes. And even though it is a swing state, it definitely not. It's far from the most important swing state. So then, why do I say it's the crossroads of American politics? Why do I say that the shifts that go on in this state can be applied to the nation at large? And in fact, in my opinion, are the best way to understand national politics? Well, I think we have to define the different regions of Wisconsin. So we have this area from around Lafayette. You can include Greene County, skirting around Dane County. We'll get to that later. Taking up Sauk County. Juneau is around the limits. And beginning to end off around Eau Claire. Think of it as the places that border Iowa and then the places that border those places. You know, Grant, Crawford, and Vernon are the only counties that border Iowa, but you still have places like La Crosse, Trempealeau, Buffalo, Jackson included in this region. And it is what and I'm not the only one to come up with this name. It's not like I invented this. It's what people in Wisconsin call the driftless region. This area is very similar to Iowa in that, one, it's mostly rural, and two, it's an ancestrally Democrat area that has shifted towards Republicans in recent years. This northeastern Iowa trend is especially stunning when you think that in not even just 2008, a generational Democratic landslide, but in 2012, Democrats were sweeping most of these eastern Iowa um, counties. Obama won Iowa quite easily and won it mostly because he won these rural areas, while keeping up somewhat impressive margins in Johnson, Polk, Story, Lynn. The real reason behind his win that rhymed, wow, was these rural areas in Iowa. He wasn't blown out like Kamala Harris or Joe Biden or Hillary Clinton. In fact, he went on offense and won quite a few of them. And in similar fashion, Barack Obama was able to win quite a few of these counties. If I'm not mistaken, Lafayette, Grant, Crawford, Richland, Sauk, Columbia, Vernon, Jackson, Trempealeau County are all Obama Trump counties. I might be wrong about one or two of those, but the general idea stands. And I think a great way to show that is actually Wisconsin's third district. Now, this is a disgusting looking district. It looks atrocious. I, I, I know why it was drawn. I still hate it. It's still disgusting. It's one of the stupidest districts ever drawn, in as much as it packs Eau Claire, Portage, and La Crosse into a district with most of these Republican friendly rural areas. You can draw this district much better for Republicans. One, remove the arm. This contributes so much to it being a competitive district. Because if instead you just shaved off Adams, Wood, and Portage and replaced it with solidly Republican rural areas in the center of the state, It would be a much more Republican district. And two, Eau Claire should not be in this district. You take Eau Claire, you put it up north into Tom Tiffany's district, who, one, is a massive overperformer, and two, represents one of the reddest districts in Wisconsin. Potentially, you could make an argument the reddest district in Wisconsin, though Scott Fitzgerald won by a similar amount. But had you taken Eau Claire and put it up there, like Republicans in 2020 and 2021 wish to do, this would be a much more solid Republican district. But it begins to make sense when you realize this map was actually drawn by Republicans as a Democratic pack. Now, in 2010, Republicans swept most of the offices in Wisconsin. They took the governorship by a rather large margin, with Scott Walker, the county executive of Milwaukee, defeating Tom Barrett, if I'm not mistaken, who was actually the mayor of Milwaukee. I might be getting it confused with another election, but Republicans won that. They won a majority in the state house and state senate. And when the 2010 redistricting cycle came, they made this as a Democratic pack. Why? Well, as funny as it sounds, in 2008, Democrats won District 8 and District 7 because Eau Claire was in District 7. Now, they took Eau Claire out of District 7 and put it into District 3 because Democrats had a popular incumbent here who swept nearly all the counties in every one of his elections, so why not make it a Democratic pack district? Now, I think that shows pretty well how far Republican these areas have trended in recent years. Um, to think of it in a different way, imagine a scenario in which Texas draws a gerrymander for themselves. Go to Texas. This is a pretty good gerrymander for Republicans. Imagine a scenario in which District 35 flips Republican in 10 years. This district. Imagine it flipping. Like, people don't talk about these trends because 2016 was a massive year, a really weird year, but it's pretty similar to stuff like Texas 34th, which this district was drawn, once again, as a Democrat pack. It was about Biden plus 16, if I'm not mistaken, and had a PVI of about D plus 22. Just trying to remember those from previous experience. They might be wrong. The only Republican counties in here were Kennedy and Kleberg. And Kennedy was, as funny as it is, a pretty baby red county. This county went for Hillary Clinton in 2016, while this portion of Hidalgo and Cameron and Willacy were pretty solidly Democrat counties. Trump carried all three of these. He might not have carried this portion of Hidalgo County, but he carried the county at large. He also won Cameron and Willacy by a decent margin, and probably ended up winning this district by like 3 to 4%. So that's the type of shift I'm describing in southwestern Wisconsin. You also have this area, which I think is called the Northern Woods. It includes some blue dots like the aforementioned Portage County, Menominee, which is a Native American reservation. I don't want to say Indian because I feel like YouTube's going to get mad at me. And it also includes Ashland, Bayfield, and Douglas, which are pretty senior heavy homes, senior heavy counties. A lot of it is retirees from Illinois and the Chicago metropolitan area. But even so, they've been shifting right in recent years in defiance of the general trend of seniors shifting towards the left. Now, for the most part, this is where Republicans run up their votes. We'll get to another area later, but this is one of the areas where Republicans have improved from 2012, but not completely. You look back way long ago, counties like Price and Sawyer, which are solidly Republican, used to vote for Democrats. If I'm not mistaken, John Kerry won Price County, a Trump plus 31 county. That has shifted Republican in recent years, but not nearly enough to justify what? A 32-point swing in just 2 decades. So, pretty big swing. But for the most part, in most elections, Republicans net quite a bit of votes from these northern areas because while southwestern Wisconsin is a white working class area that could be compared to like a Mahoning or a Trumbull County, these areas are your staple rural areas that run throughout the country. A little bit different. Especially Clinton coalitions could appeal to these areas, but for the most part, they're for the most part rural areas. I know I said for the most part twice, but shut up. Um, but at the same time, that isn't where Republicans get all of their votes from. Because if they only had this northern area and southwestern Wisconsin to gain votes from, and Democrats continued to have their two vote strongholds, this would be a D plus 15 state, the likes of which would be comparable to Illinois. But that's not the only place where Republicans get their votes. I'll introduce the Fox River Valley later, but the most important part is these WOW counties: Waukesha, Ozaukee, and Washington. These three counties are some of the biggest Republican vote netters, or at least they used to be. These counties have been trending left in recent years. They actually trended much more towards, not trended, but shifted much more towards the left in 2020, especially Waukesha and Ozaukee, which made Washington continuing to shift Democrat. In fact, shifting the most Democrat out of any of these counties. Pretty shocking in 2024. This is mostly what has fueled Republican prospects in Wisconsin throughout the decades. It's the reason why Bush got within a point of winning Wisconsin in both of his runs. It's the reason why Republicans have been able to win statewide elections since way back when. That is the old Republican path to Wisconsin. But like many things under the Trump era, things have not just been changed, they have been nearly reverted. These formerly heavily Republican suburban counties, while still netting Republicans' votes, have dwindled in their support for Republicans in recent years. Bush was getting nearly 75% of the vote in most of these counties, if not maybe 70%. And now one of them is nearly within 10 points of flipping now. Of course, that's Ozaukee, the most narrow and smallest one of these counties. I think, yeah. Um, Even smaller than Washington, which isn't a particularly big county, but still contributes to the general trend of these suburban counties shifting away from the GOP. You also have some areas of that lead into Milwaukee, especially southern Milwaukee, which I think I can also show from the House election. We go to Wisconsin's first. You can actually see that southern Milwaukee, even though Brian Steele is an overperformer, this area of southern Milwaukee probably narrowly voted for Trump, but in previous years like 2000, 2004, even 2012, it heavily voted Republican. That area of southern Milwaukee is very similar to Waukesha, Washington, and Ozaukee. A little bit more Democrat friendly, I will admit. I think Trump very narrowly won that area of Milwaukee. Well, I do. I don't think it's right there on the map. He won Waukesha by 20, but still a previous Republican area that has trended left in recent years, and that's pushed much of the Democrat shift in Milwaukee. Now, Milwaukee shifted back Republican because the city of Milwaukee itself shifted Republican. That's really the only reason why Milwaukee hasn't shifted left off a cliff. I even saw in 2020 where Milwaukee seemed maxed out for Democrats. They pried another 3 point shift out of it. Same thing with Dane County, except more in Dane County. We'll get to that later, which contributed to Biden's very narrow win in the state. And if you want to call me biased, but Biden won in a landslide, and Trump didn't. Like, I still think this is a very narrow margin. That's the point of the entire video. But anyways, Milwaukee has begun to net Democrats a few more votes in recent years, but for the most part, the main Republican decline has been the counties of Waukesha, Washington, and Ozaukee. These are the areas where Republicans have lost the most voters in these four counties, which used to be Republicans' only path to Wisconsin. Not that long ago, Waukesha used to outvote Milwaukee, and now Milwaukee outvotes Waukesha nearly 3-1. In terms of net votes. But there's other areas for Republicans. There's this in-between area of Kewanee, all the way to Sheboygan, and then Fond du Lac, Dodge, Jefferson. They're similar to the Weld counties, except they're more rural and more susceptible to Trump's messaging. They were kind of Republican um, in the past. They've remained about stagnant during the Trump era. You've even seen some shift Republican, like Fond du Lac County shift Republican. Actually, I think it might have shifted. Yeah, shifted Republican in 2020. So these areas are, for the most part, pretty stagnant. But provide Republicans a steady stream of votes where they net 40,000 throughout this area, the in between area, between the northern woods or the northern area of Wisconsin and this in between area is the Bow counties, which I call the Fox River Valley because it's the valley of the Fox River, which goes from Green Bay to Oshkosh. Now, these areas are pretty Republican, not as ancestrally Republican as the WoW counties. One, they used to vote Democrat on a good night for Democrats, and two, they don't have Republicans that many votes. Even Ozaukee County is an 11-point win. The narrowest of these is a 5-point win for Republicans. Now, these areas have shifted pretty Democrat during the Trump era. Winnebago County got way too close for comfort um, in 2020. Like, Ozaki had a massive shift, but this was way too close. And we're going to get to some other races later, but we've seen it get pretty competitive in recent years. But for the most part, this is a somewhat swingy area. But if Republicans are remaining competitive in Wisconsin, which they usually are, they're winning these three counties. Winnebago's being the only iffy one, but for the most part, they're winning Outagamie and Brown County, and they're winning it by a little bit, so that they net a few more votes to put them over the top of Wisconsin statewide. Now, there's really you can include it as two different areas. You can include these suburban counties around Dane County as their own thing. I find that they shift pretty similar to the driftless area, so I just kind of I pretend that they're part of the driftless area, even though that's probably not the best comparison. But they're somewhat rural. They do have some suburban and urban areas, like South County, over by the Madison border. There's a large city there, the type of city that makes it flip to Biden and then flip back to Trump. So something to keep in mind. But then we got Madison. Madison is a little bit weird. It used to be a monolith for Democrats continuing to shift left. And then it just stopped. Like it just stopped endlessly shifting towards Democrats and rebounded a little bit. For the most part, I think this is because Democrats are scraping their ceiling, and they're to some extent beginning to lose voters. Since Madison is a university town, kind of. There's the University of Wisconsin at Madison there, which is a big reason why it's so liberal. But from what I've heard, they began to lose a few university voters in Madison County, but this area is very strikingly different to the rural areas around it because Madison does have rural areas, or not Madison, the city, but Dane County has rural areas. It's just they're mostly filled with liberal college graduates, which means that they vote solely Democrats. So Dane County is it's not the single biggest Democratic netter of votes. 316, 138, 273, 85. I think that means Milwaukee gets the edge, but it's pretty stagnant and a monolith. Milwaukee, one, used to be pretty good for Republicans. Like in a good year, you could see it be a 20-point margin. Dane, even though it has shifted left in recent memory, one part of that was third parties coming home to Democrats in 2020, and two, it's kept itself as a monolith since even 2000. So it's a pretty big Democratic vote netter. Now, why I think, and I've stressed this before, but why I think Wisconsin is the quintessential state for America is it shows the different evolution of coalitions. Bush used to win or get competitive in Wisconsin. The Bush era of the Republican Party used to win by running up in Waukesha, Washington, Ozaki, doing okay in the northern portion of the state, doing okay in the Fox River Valley counties, and this in between area, and hoping you don't get killed in these rural areas. I also neglected to mention Kenosha, Racine, other Trumpian counties, even though a bit more suburban. Um, they are pretty Trump friendly, so something to keep in mind. But that used to be the old Bush coalition. It worked well for a little bit. Probably had the 2004 election been held a little bit earlier so that Bush's approval didn't slip as much, Bush would have won Wisconsin with that coalition. And other people, even you could say Scott Walker to some extent, won based off that Bush coalition. But most Republicans' wins in Wisconsin have been based off that coalition. But Trump changed the game completely in Wisconsin when it seemed like these suburban counties were inevitably going to shift somewhat uh, Democrat, and Democratic voters in Milwaukee and Dayton weren't as open to voting for Republicans as, 2004 or 1988 back in 2012. Trump reshaped the Republican Party, making it viable in states like Wisconsin by taking a Democratic vote sink in this driftless area and turning it into quite the opposite, an area where Republicans would take as many votes as possible and use that to win statewide. That's worked somewhat well for him, but where it hasn't worked out and where we still see this old coalition is the Wisconsin Supreme Court elections. This has usually been a pretty bad category of races for conservatives. The last time a conservative won a Supreme Court race in Wisconsin, wait, well, it's a little bit ago. It was 6 years ago. I don't know to the date, but around 6 years ago, give or take like 5 days. It's been a while. We haven't had too many races, but conservatives lost the last two Supreme Court races by 10, or actually over 10. Why Daniel Kelly? I've explained before. Imagine Mark Robinson, but like the same complete lack of appeal, but because he's just stupid. Not because like he did all the stuff that I can't say on YouTube, but like he's just a fucking dumbass. Imagine that, and that's who Wisconsin Republicans ran. Nonpartisan race, so kind of ran, but for the most part, that change in coalitions has been to Wisconsin Republicans' detriment. You see the driftless area voting pretty solidly Democrat. Yellow is Democrat, pink is Republican. It's nonpartisan, so it's a bit weird. But you see these areas voting pretty solidly Democrat because one, nonpartisan race, two, Protasewicz was a better candidate, and three, Republicans really didn't turn out for this race. This race had about half the turnout, like give or take a 100,000 votes, as the presidential election in 2024, which for an election held April 4th, somewhat high turnout, but still not April 4th in 2023, an off year. Somewhat high turnout, but for the amount of money spent on this race, pretty underwhelming. And we've seen another election like this crop up, 2025. This will be uploaded on the 29th. 3 days from now, Wisconsin will have another Supreme Court election that will once again determine the ideological balance in the court. That is why I think it's a crossroads, because this is one of your last opportunities if you want to see the Bush coalition in action to see it happen, because you see these rural areas more ancestrally Democrat voting for a Democrat. Obviously, when I mentioned about Price County voting Democrat, you kind of see it because it's much more narrow than the presidential election, but more than likely, I'm going to end up voting Democrat. Sawyer County is pretty close, but also that's because the state swung like 12 points between these two elections. Take it with a grain of salt. But Republican path in these nonpartisan elections in Wisconsin, even though they're heavily partisanly implicated, Daniel Kelly ran as an open conservative, Protasewicz as an open liberal. In the 2025 race, Susan Crawford is run as an open liberal. Brad Schimel is run as an open conservative. Still, without the Republican and Democrat next to the names on the ballot, without Trump himself, on the ballot, you have seen coalitions devolve, or more accurately, lag behind. The 2025 race seems like a close one, and it's going to be a crossroads for the administration. It's going to be one of the first big tells on whether Trump, and if Trump is a viable, popular president, and if the mandate can still stand, even when it doesn't look that good for Republicans. I'm not going to lie. I do think that Republicans are favored to lose the race on April 1st. But, one, I don't think it's lopsided. This was a pretty massive liberal win, but simply the fact that Daniel Kelly's name is not on the ballot has changed this race for the better. That's half a joke. But in all seriousness, Brad Schimel has run a much better campaign than Daniel Kelly, and he has a serious chance of flipping the Supreme Court seat. He's looking much better in the early voting, and I do think he has a lot of persuasion abilities to persuade Prochaskowitz voters to end up voting for him. Plus, the race has seen nearly double the amount of spending, so I do think he'll have a lot more of the low propensity Trump voters turn out, especially with the multiple Trump endorsements for Brad Schimel. How the race ends up on election night remains to be seen. We don't know. And it's going to be a tense race because of that. It's going to be it's a massive race, and it's one of the only massive races we will have for a while. And it's going to be a big read on one, can the GOP survive outside of high turnout presidential years? You can even add midterms to this because the GOP can only turn out for November in an even year election. You're going to be missing out on a lot because so much of the state of Wisconsin has been terraformed by these Supreme Court elections. That partially is the reason why Wisconsin was the closest swing state and why Wisconsin almost completely reversed paths last November. These elections are important for determining how a state is run and how the political geography of a state is changed. Power is the most effective way to get yourself reelected. You know, Ron DeSantis, he came in with one of the narrowest of narrow wins in a massive upset in 2018, pulling ahead of his Democratic challenger by half a point. And he was reelected by 20% because he used that power adequately. If Democrats can maintain a majority on the Wisconsin Supreme Court for the next 3 years until the 2028 seat is up, it's going to be bad for Wisconsin conservatives. The Democratic majority in the Wisconsin Supreme Court election will last at least through almost all of Trump's term. The next time, if this seat is not won, that Republicans can win the Wisconsin Supreme Court would be August of 2028, or at least have their justice seated. It's a massive race for that. And that's assuming that Democrats don't gain seats in 2026 and 2027, where two conservative seats are up for re election. This is a massive race, and it's a crossroads of not just politics, but this channel itself. I've defined myself mostly after this race. This race was the big shattering of the previous narratives for Republicans that, like, Republicans could abandon the working class. Republicans could run without Trump. This race was one of the foots in the coffin for Ron DeSantis, for Nikki Haley, for all the people who opposed Trump in the primary. Because this showed what happened when you ran an anti-Trump, or at least not explicitly pro-Trump campaign as a Republican. Because the Republican base has morphed around Trump himself. And this race, even though I did support Trump through most of the early portions of the Republican primary, this is where I knew Trump was our only chance. And I don't believe a single other Republican would have won in 2024, and especially not Wisconsin, which, even though it was competitive before, and it is kind of naturally a swing state, the coalitions have evolved, and most of it has not been by Republicans' choices. Wisconsin is the quintessential American state to describe American politics, because Republicans have found a way to continue to thrive in the state. And even if it's narrowly, even if it comes at the cost of a Senate election on the same ballot, even if it means that District 3 and District 1 are somewhat competitive, even districts like District 8 could be competitive long term if Republicans continue to go down around the Green Bay area. Republicans have still found a way to survive in Wisconsin. And as opposed to the narrative of Trump came in when any other Republican would have won in a landslide in 2016 and 2020 and 2024, it has not been by the choice of Republicans. Wisconsin represents how American politics have gone because Republicans have been forced to adapt or die in Wisconsin. Wisconsin saw the first cracks for Republicans when the suburban counties began to trend away from the GOP. When the rural areas became really the only way for the GOP to survive. And this election, this 2025 Supreme Court election, I show the 2023 map, but you can tell I'm talking about 2025 because I said 2025. It's going to be a crossroads for that because it's going to show that if Republicans can continue to exist in Wisconsin without Trump, because Republicans didn't have a choice. They had to adapt or die, and Trump gave Republicans that chance. But these are the things that you lose with that strategy because had Trump not owned the GOP, had instead 2016 been Scott Walker as the nominee, the GOP coalition would have been much more adapted for these elections. But at what cost? The GOP probably wouldn't have remained competitive in America in the long term. And so, Wisconsin is the quintessential American state because it shows the sacrifices the GOP has made. If the GOP wins this election on April 1st, it will be a massive, resounding victory for the administration because through nothing but the sheer skill of Brad Schimmel as a candidate and the Trump coalition being able to turn out for these off year elections, it will be a massive upset and it will be a massive, massive victory and show that the Trump coalition is viable in the long term. And also, save the state from radical liberal justices. But that's neither here nor there. Though that probably is more pressing to the average Wisconsinite. But if Republicans lose it, if Susan Crawford wins, it will be a major indictment for the administration. An indictment on the administration that we'll have to wrestle with as conservatives if we lose this race. And this is why this is the most important race of 2025. This is the most important race, honestly, besides for this presidential race, of my time in the political community. You know, I'm even saying it's more important than this 2023 race, even more important than Kentucky governor or Mississippi governor, even more important than other Supreme Court races in other states like Pennsylvania and Georgia and North Carolina. You know, those races came and went, but this race, these Wisconsin Supreme Court races have stuck because this is the crossroads of the Trump coalition. This is the most important race that I myself have been a part of. And it, it's going to be a major milestone for this channel. And it's going to be a major change for this channel. But before we wrestle with those implications, I'd like to thank you for watching this video. This was a bit longer. I did it a bit more documentary style. I really only needed these 3 tabs. I also, modeled out Wisconsin by the partisan or by the margin of the 2024 election. I was prepared to fuck around in here, like, oh my god, what if Dane County shifted 25 points Republican? Wow, then Republicans would win the state. But I hate this because they don't have the 2024 results. It makes me very mad, very angry. But yeah, I'm trying more serious content. You guys tell me if you like it or not. But you sat through quite a bit of that. I can check, and it's like nearly 40 minutes. So I hope you learned something. If you didn't, chew me out in the comments. But if you did, I'd much appreciate a subscription. it helps out the channel a lot. It helps us to grow, meet new people, reach new perspectives. It, it's a we've hit big milestones before, um, but I think the biggest milestone of all, thing I can't quantify with numbers, with hitting a goal, passing it, setting a new one, is the fact that somehow I'm still here and I'm still able to give my perspective on these things, and I'm still able to put my interest, my knowledge on this, even if it's not the best or smartest knowledge. I'm still able to put that out into the world. And it's a humbling feeling to see the support that I've been given. So I think probably um, this will be one of the last serious videos before the major change in this channel, which will be the Wisconsin Supreme Court election. So, from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much. This has been quite the journey. Tomorrow, I think I'm going to just do a joke video. I'm still thinking of that. Otherwise, it probably won't be related to this court election. Obviously, Monday will be final predictions for the April 1st elections, and then Tuesday is April Fool's. I'm not going to spend it predicting elections. We're going to have some fun. But before I lose you, thank you so much. Thank you for watching. I say that a lot, but I hope it can resonate now, even if it's the only time it will truly resonate. Thank you for watching. Godspeed. Vote April 1st, if you can, for Brad Schimmel. Testers done. Out.